Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this digital version of TEDx Oslo. A lot has happened in the world over the recent months. 2 weeks ago, schools and kindergartens were shut down in Norway, and workers were encouraged to work from home. Today, this is our new everyday reality. We haven't yet digested the full import of any of this, and a lot of information is swirling around us, making us uncertain and afraid. In Norway, the government has extended restrictions and regulations until after Easter. But some experts predict that this situation will last much longer. How long is anyone's guess? Apart from a handful of populist politicians, no one believes that this will be over in a few weeks. So what can we do? We believe we can do a lot. This TEDx Oslo is made in the hope that we soon move forward to discussing the new normal. Only if we do that can we begin the search for long-term solutions. We believe that this is the only way we can achieve any kind of meaningful control over this situation. We don't think that this crisis will be solved, at least not in long term, by politicians telling us what to do. Rather, it will be solved by us, the people, telling the politicians what kind of society we want and need. Well, the idea of holding a digital conference was born only 8 days ago. So a huge thank you is due to the hardworking team and the speakers that have worked around the clock since to make it happen. Even though we are on a digital platform, we have organized this event in the same way that we would have organized a normal live event, applying the same values and standards. However, a couple of things are necessarily limited by this new format, namely the length of the talks and the potential for you, the audience, to meet afterwards and in the breaks, sharing thoughts and being inspired by each other. But the fact that we are now largely limited to connecting in the virtual world as possibly, and perhaps paradoxically, strengthen our digital ties with a wider community. So please use your preferred social media platforms to share your thoughts and inspirations. You may already be familiar with some of our speakers. In order to make this happen, this event happen, we invited all our former speakers of TEDx Oslo to participate in a workshop where they could discuss their field of expertise as they apply in relation to the situation we find ourselves today. A primary reason for setting up this event was to provide a platform for these particular speakers, who we knew would have ideas, perspectives worth sharing, and which could prove helpful in these unsettling times. So welcome to the Digital TEDx Oslo Corona Special. We have a great program for you. 16 speakers have worked day and night preparing their talks in order to share their ideas, thoughts, and solutions with you. Where we are headed, what we can do, how we can empower ourselves to manage and thrive in this strange situation. But before we begin with the first speaker, we would also like to give a big thank you to our partners for making this conference happen in such a short notice. Fritor, Holy, and Zoom. Okay. The first speaker on the virtual stage is Iver Naumann. He's the director of Fridtjof Nansen Institute, and in his talk, he will share a perspective that focuses on the consequences of the big policies crisis and how China is using it to challenge America's leading role in world politics. Welcome, Iver Naumann.
Thank you so much, Sigurd, and a good afternoon to you as well. I will speak about hegemons. You and I live the way we do because our social world is guaranteed by a leading state. That's what a hegemon is. The first amongst equals. To be the hegemon means that other states will always think about what you will do and how you will react. You have everybody's attention with all the practical advantages and all the status that entails. However, to be the hegemon is not only a question of pride, it also comes with responsibility of being in charge of how the system operates. It takes hard political, economic, and legal work to uphold, say, a global banking system or a global system for oil trade or intellectual property, or indeed for how to handle a pandemic. It is the hegemon that underwrites the stability of the system by paying for its institutions, warding off problems, ensuring smooth sailing, if you like. It matters who this hegemon is, for he who pays the piper calls the tune. Present hegemon, the US, established itself out of the crisis that was the Second World War. It did so first by handing out gifts to other states. It helped other states with the sundry medical and repatriation problems that popped up in the wake of that war. Then it went on to set up institutions that served its own purposes and supported its leading role in the system. Gifts given by the Marshall Program might serve as an example. They were all helpful for Europe, and they served to tie Europeans down as American allies. The US dominated and eventually derailed its key challenger, the Soviet Union, by doing all this hegemonic work better than did the Soviets. During the last 4 decades, a new hegemonic challenge has been in the making. China's power has grown steadily to the point that it is now challenging the United States as the leading power in the world. The corona crisis has presented China with an excellent opportunity to demonstrate its worldwide power. Nothing surprising here. Crises are always a key driver of social change, and that includes the fight over who should be the state system's top dog. Pundits talk about this as hegemonic change. As American presidents from George Bush on have spent less resources on maintaining the liberal world order, of which it was the leading hegemon, China has gradually stepped up its efforts to replace it. President Trump's avid attacks on American allies and on the global institutions of the US's own making has further paved the way for China. Now, as the world is in the midst of its worst crisis since the Second World War, China seizes the opportunity to attack American hegemony head-on. Note that its strategy shadows the US's own historic strategy of how to become a hegemon. China offers medicines, doctors, material assistance to alleviate a crisis. Chinese gifts that are now being so gratefully received by a number of other states will at some time have to be met with counter-gifts. China is aptly using the corona crisis to build up political favors with a view to replacing American hegemony with Chinese hegemony. Each and every one of us depends on the institutions that uphold the world and that the hegemon actually gives us, so that we can buy the goods we like, go where we like, live as we like. Chinese hegemony will change not only what we consume, but also what kind of political world we live in and think of as natural. To give but one example, in China, access to education, hospitals, and foreign travel is regulated not primarily in terms of citizens' rights or buying power, but in terms of good behavior. Loyalty to the state pays. Chinese hegemony would mean that this way of thinking about social services would spread to the rest of the world. There is a cost to being the hegemon. A US that alienates its allies, does not pay up for the upkeep of global institutions, and fails to take the lead in crises cannot remain the hegemon. One reading of the current crises is that China is using it to stake its claim as the new hegemon. In lieu of American and European leadership, China continues its rise to world domination. Thank you.
Thank you, Iver. The next speaker is Einar Øverenge. He is a professor of philosophy at the Inland University College, but at the same time, He also works directly with people in the workplace with questions related to ethics, values, and cultural development. In this talk, he will talk about politics in a post-pandemic world. Einar, the stage is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you very much for being invited here to give this digital talk. Right now, you and I are experiencing a certain degree of totalitarian rule. Radical intervention in our lives is the story of the day. This is what happens right now. Curfew, traveling ban, restricted use of private property, all in the name of fighting the coronavirus. And this might be the right thing to do. We are not quite sure. It might be the right thing to do, maybe not. But nevertheless, whether it's right or not, it has consequences for me, for you, for the future of politics. What is politics going to look like after this? Are we going to start praising totalitarian rule in the future after this? Politics is all about power, and power is about the ability to get things done. Politicians, they have the power to get things done because they have the right to make decisions. But even if they have the right to make decisions, they are not able to get things done by themselves. There are stakeholders here, you, me, the people, and we can go along with their decisions or not. So really, politicians, they have power to get things done, but that's really a matter of having power to get other people to get things done. They have to get people to go along with their decisions. So how can we accomplish that? Well, the typical way of doing that in the democracy is through deliberation. We turn out arguments, we invite counter-arguments, we respond to those again, and slowly and gradually it evolves through some kind of common commitment. I'm in, I've been listened to, I've discussed it, so I will go along, I'm included. This takes time, and time is pressing. And as fear is spreading around the globe right now, the urge is to try to produce this kind of commitment with not through deliberation, but by command. And why is that? Well, it seems to be more effective. And that might be quite right. Right now, at least, it is more effective and maybe the right thing to do. But it is still taking a risk, because what we're doing, we're letting our elected politicians taste a different kind of power. Power by command rather than deliberation. And that might be a little addictive. Maybe that tastes quite well. Maybe they start to think, why can't we solve pressing issues further this way? Why spend time on deliberation? And people, they also, by fear, go along with this on the underlying assumption there's no time for criticism, there's no time for argument, there's no time for disagreement, there's no time for deliberation. We have to act now. And maybe they start to look for a strong leader. And suddenly or gradually, their built-in resistance to totalitarian rule is fading. And now we have a situation when you and I and politicians alike start growing a certain taste for totalitarian rule. Society might go into subtle changes from democratic principles to something else, something more totalitarian, because it's very effective, it's proven effective. And I'm not saying that what we're doing right now is wrong. It might be the right medicine, but as all medicine, it has side effects. And one side effect now is, what kind of forces are we setting in motion here? What is happening? And we should be aware of that so we can detect it and stop it when things turn back to normal. If they do, let's hope they do. Because after all, history has proven that this way of doing politics is not sustainable in the long run. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next speaker up on the virtual stage works as a commissioner for children's rights, ensuring there is a safe learning environment in all kindergartens and schools in Oslo. Her professional experience includes teaching and school leadership, and she has an academic background in pedagogy, leadership, and children's rights. She will talk about how a crisis always brings with it new perspectives and why we should change the way we view childhood. Please welcome Kjersti Oren.
Imagine being an astronaut. I guess we all have at some point when we were kids. Floating around in space, seeing the world from a whole new perspective, getting to use futuristic technological equipment and creating history, and being isolated with a handful of people over a significant period of time. The last few days, locked up in my little capsule, I've noticed that I'm a pretty bad astronaut. I've made a terrible discovery where something about my parenting style has come to the surface. You see, NASA doesn't just train astronauts to carry out the work tasks. They also train astronauts to be around each other in stressful situations over an extended period of time. Your physical strength and your technical knowledge are insufficient on its own. If you're not trained in adequate stress handling and emotional awareness, NASA won't pick you for the shuttle. They pick people who make others feel good. A big part of this responsibility is contributing to the mood in the shuttle. I haven't done that. I've been frustrated of being asked 1,000 questions. I've been annoyed about being nagged until I provide the required answer. I've been devastated that the schedule wasn't followed in the right order, and I've been irritated by pranks. So how did this happen to me? Me, who talk about children's rights and development for a living? Is it possible there's a chance we're too wrapped up in keeping busy, scheduling activities, exploring technological possibilities, and ensuring academic growth that we're sort of missing out on raising whole human beings during a very stressful time? Haven't we basically entered the space shuttle and started pushing all these buttons without doing any of the emotional groundwork? If so, this is pretty symptomatic of our current society's emphasis on childhood. Individual skills and achievements far outweigh your values and emotional capacity, and often the terms raising and discipline get merged. Here's what I quickly came to realize about myself on day 2 in isolation. I'm terrified of letting go of power. I think that if I let go of power, it reflects poorly on me. That if rules and plans are not followed, the consequences are going to be terrible for me. So for the upcoming weeks, here's what I'm going to try. I'm building my own spaceship. I'm not forgetting the physical and academic training, but I'm putting the most emphasis on setting the mood and coexisting without power battles with other astronauts. I'm the captain, but my responsibility is setting, not killing the mood. The world after Corona is going to look pretty different. We're going to need more people who are creative and courageous. People who do ask 1,000 questions, who do yell out until they get an answer that they're happy with, whose first instinct isn't to follow a schedule. Not to mention, we're going to need more people who can make us laugh, who do silly things, and who pull great pranks. So ease up. Don't be afraid of losing power. Fly your spaceship safely and make sure it lands in new territory with everybody happily on board, ready to start the real work. Thank you.
Thank you, Kjerstin. Next speaker, Jim Tørresen has been involved in artificial intelligence and robotics research for more than 25 years. He is a professor at the University of Oslo, where he leads the Robotics and Intelligent System Research Group, and he is a principal investigator in the Ritmo Center for interdisciplinary studies in rhythm, time, and motion. He will give us an insight into his view on how robots can help us through the corona crisis. Jim?
Robots will in the future take over many of our current jobs, and robots will look after and support you and me. We should look forward to this rather than worry about it. The situation where we now with isolation and quarantine is one example of why. I see more supportive tools to help us coming rather than Terminator being around the corner. I would say that robot companions today are at a low level, both in their intelligence and location where they are situated on lawns and floors outside and inside our houses, if they are there at all. These days we sit in our homes communicating digitally in a completely new way that we have never done before. We can send and receive whatever message and document we like. However, the world is analog, and we need food to survive. And some jobs need us for manual work. We cannot solve the current corona crisis with lawn moving and vacuum cleaning robots. And there are only very few robots to take care of and support those people today needing testing and services related to the coronavirus. Much technology is available in hospitals for monitoring health. However, feeding and personal care involving heavy lifting are still done by humans. We need larger robots that are trained for handling and interacting with humans. Robots would make support and care services more available and increase quality of it, while at the same time reducing the risk of transmitting infection. I myself miss a mobile robot that I can tell to go to the shop and buy groceries. It will not need to do it autonomously. Remotely controlled would also be fine. To reduce the risk of infection, family members are currently not allowed to visit their older family members in nursing homes due to risk of virus transmission. A robot will represent a much more active interaction than a mobile phone, since it can move around and family members can decide where to look when they interact through the robot eyes of the robot. Robots would result in less manual work needed by caregivers, and even more time is freed for human contact. None would argue that we should remove the washing machine in the homes of those needing care, to have the care person spend more time in the house doing manual work. That will not lead to more human contact, just more physical work. We should rather bring in more technology that can reduce manual work. So then you may ask, shouldn't we worry about anything? Yes, the politicians and people in charge of budgeting will be those that decide how many humans should be hired for healthcare is in the robot-populated the society of the future. Having a personal robot would be great during such a virus crisis like now. However, to have them operational for future corona-like crises, we should welcome them also when there is not a crisis ongoing. Through a robot, we can be present at work and together with relatives when staying at home, being sick and afraid of transferring our disease to other people. We can also get increased dignity by having the robot helping us out with personal care if we are unable to perform that all by ourselves. So we need robots more than ever, and we need to trust the technology. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Next, we have an expert in body language. Kyrre Teksnes is a movement coach, speaker, and choreographer. He will talk about social distancing during COVID-19 and how to adjust your communication and relationship to others using the 2 meters rule. Welcome, Kyrre Teksnes.
Hi, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to my movement studio here in Oslo, Norway. What happens when we must have a distance of 1 meter or more between yourself and everyone else? That's the situation during the COVID-19 pandemic. And outside, we see everyone walking like they have this huge invisible bubble around them, like trying to find food, going to the bus, being in stores, walking in the streets. You see, they have these invisible bubbles, always aware of what is around them. And nothing can touch them. It's really, they are so protective. They're always on guard. And what happens with your body when you're always on guard? I mean, of course, you don't see those people walk like this, but there are subtleties inside the bodies. And those might be slight tension in your stomach because you're ready to stop. And also in your legs, your hamstrings mobilize in order to pull back. So just walking around, being aware, not trying to touch anyone, being in this hyper-aware situation with this bubble, when you go home, you want to relax, but you can't. Because unless you live alone, it's crowded because your wife or husband or partner is not at work, working at home. Your kids, not at school or kindergarten, at home. And you just want to relax. And everyone's different. So some people appreciate the distance also at home, but some people just want to be close and hug. And I mean, we're so different. And it's funny because my beautiful wife, Mona, and we are different in that sense. She's a 2 meter. She's not 2 meters tall, but she really likes the 2 meter distance. I'm a hugger. I can hug anyone. So there's no distance. And how to make that work, that's a challenge. And of course, you could be very practical about it, like, okay, give me some space, you know? She wants some space. And I was like, okay, you want some space? I know, maybe 2 meters. Is that enough? 3 meters? That's maybe too practical and a little bit rigid. But maybe let's have a look at how does it actually work? Because this bubble that I talked about, this hyper-awareness around the body, that has been studied. And Princeton University and science refer to this bubble, this hyper-awareness around the body, as the second skin. Not the first skin, which is physical, but it's second skin outside the body. And it shows that neurons in the brain fire like hell if something is about to touch, like not yet have touched, but is just outside. And that goes even if you don't see it, like you have closed eyes, and still you will actually be able to sense it. Science shows this. So we're wired to have this bubble. We're wired to have this protective suit in order to distinguish what is me and what is not me. I mean, it would be impossible to walk really around if you didn't have that ability to distinguish what is me and what is not me. Let's say you walk and you would stumble into tables, you would constantly have problems with open doors, you know, the shoulders would be hurt. So they're really, it's a good thing, you know. But then as you meet someone and the choice comes, do I want to extend this second suit and wrap it around the other person? And then it becomes a we, like you become one in a sense, because your brain reacts to as this, now we're one unity. Or do I not want that? And this is very interesting. And I'm sure it's also very challenging in these times that we live in, because the distance is so important to keep. And there's a way that you can actually measure also, or not measure, but you can sense when it goes from being like a social distance. Let's say you can actually do this with someone that you know, and you can stand and look at each other, maybe 3 or 4 meters apart, and then you walk slowly towards each other. And being far away, you have this social distance, and suddenly you will feel something in your body, probably. And the strange thing also is that when you look at the other person's face, at this point, when you come closer, it's like the face changes, which is a little bit strange. Just test it. It's fun, because then you have a real sense of when are you in the personal zone, which sometimes people don't want, and when are you in the more mental social zone, because this goes from the mental perspective into the more emotional. So it's like when you go into the mental part, it's more like you can see the other person. You can make up your mind about who that is. You can think, you can make strategy, which is good sometimes. If it's too intense, you want to pull out, and then actually your body reacts by being more relaxed, giving your head more energy and more time to think. The opposite is that it's very close. The body starts working, mobilizing energy. You get ready to fight, flight, or fuck, or just friendship. Anyway, it's really about action. It's about sensing. It's about mobilizing energy, which could be a good thing. Let's say after the COVID-19 situation, where teachers and students again are meeting physically, it's a good thing if students are like, oh, I'm so tired, I know I'm not engaged, and the teacher is standing too far away. If this teacher just approaches, they will meet each other's bubble, and suddenly we get energized into the session. So connection, different types, whether it's emotional, mental, whether it's live or digital like we do now. I think the main thing is the connection itself. Really. It's all about the connection itself. And now that we are cut off from it, we need, and we will, to reestablish that connection, and we give more value into it. It's like now, even though I'm communicating with you in digital communication, I still feel connected. I know you're there. And it creates a certain depth when we know that this is so important at these times. And I think that depth of connection is what we really need in order to navigate forward as a society in an integrated way forward. And then I do believe we can make great things.
Thank you, Kyrre. Caroline Ditlev Simonsen is a professor at BI Norwegian Business School. Her area of research is corporate social responsibility, sustainability, and happiness. Investigating how we as individuals can maintain our current happiness while consuming less is her current research focus. What is happiness? How will it be affected by the coronavirus? And how does a challenge like this contain elements that paradoxically contribute to happiness? Caroline?
We all want to be happy, and the research shows that happiness can be related to a wide range of factors, such as age, education, culture, income, but also genes and biological factors. In January, just before the coronavirus arrived in Norway, we conducted a study on happiness. What we found was that 82% of Norwegians claimed to be very or rather happy. But how happy are we today after the coronavirus outbreak? With minimal possibility for socializing, being overworked, or on the verge of losing our jobs? I don't know. What I do know is that we can be pretty happy in situations we think it would be impossible to be happy. Likewise, we do not necessarily become happy in situations we would expect to make us happy. For instance, even though personal consumption and the standard of living in Norway has increased tremendously, we are in general at the same level of happiness as we were 30 years ago. So how can we explain this paradox? Well, the perception of happiness is closely related to how others around us are doing. If everybody around us live free and exciting lives, whereas we are forced to stay home all day long, we might not be very happy. However, if everybody else have to stay at home too, we might feel better about things and be happier. What is special in these corona times is that we are all facing a common enemy. Even though the consequences for each of us are different, the restrictions imposed on us are to a large extent the same for everyone. We are all urged to stay home, not to socialize, not to travel outside our community, not to have a Friday beer, it's not in a bar, etc. If these restrictions were only imposed on a single healthy individual, he or she would find it unbearable, with a great drop in happiness as a result. However, as long as everyone in our community is facing the same challenges, we are more likely to experience the same level of happiness too. What is also interesting is that helping and assisting others increase our level of happiness. It is amazing in these times how people are volunteering to deliver food to those of us in quarantine, to call lonely people, and to work long days in hospitals to help patients despite the huge risk of getting sick. In our study, we asked people what makes them happy. What was the most important factor for their happiness? And guess what was at the top of the list? It was family. Family is the most important factor for happiness for the majority of us. Now, during these corona times, 3 key reasons for happiness are present. First, many of us have the opportunity to be with our families most of the day. Second, we are all facing the same fears and restrictions. And third, there are new opportunities to help others. So, to conclude, during these challenging times, working together to fight a dangerous virus, we can find happiness through appreciation of family and by helping others.
Thank you, Carolina. It seems like we lost her video, but I guess this is the part of the new normal. The videos will hopefully be distributed through normal TEDx channels, and we will try to manage to have her on video then. The next speaker, Maria Røsok, is heading the organization Sex and Samfunn, Sex and Society, Norway's largest clinic for sexual and reproductive health. Sex and Samfunn treats, counsels, and teaches about 50,000 youth nurses and medical doctors every year. Please welcome her and her handy advice for times like this.
It is very difficult to have sex with a person that is 2 meters away from you. 2 meters, the distance we are told to keep these days, worldwide. So here today, I want to remind you that sex is not only for 2 or more people, you can also have sex by yourself. We know there's a lot of shame and taboo associated with masturbation, so most people don't talk about it. And there are plenty of myths about masturbation, such as hairy palms, going blind, and low sperm count. These claims are, of course, untrue. I think it's important to remember that we can have sex by ourselves, especially in days like this, when we all feel isolated in one way or another. It is important because sex often ends in an orgasm. And orgasms are exactly what we need in the situation we are right now. Because during an orgasm, your brain is working overtime to produce a slew of different hormones, like neurochemicals, like dopamine, which is a hormone that is responsible for feelings of pleasure, happiness, and motivation. And oxytocin, that makes us feel close to each other, reduces the feeling of stress, and it helps us to sleep. And there are even more benefits. Orgasms strengthens the muscles of the abdomen. This can help preventing urinary leakage. And a Harvard study shows that there is a clear link between prostate cancer and frequent ejaculation. The more frequent ejaculation between the age of 20 and 50, the less risk of developing prostate cancer later in life. And the quality of semen might get better. So there are only positive effects of masturbation. The situation we are in right now disrupts people's daily routines worldwide. It shows, among other things, that people are seeking sexual inspiration online. In Italy, the first European country to close borders and put into effect a quarantine, the porn site Pornhub offered free subscription. That gave a drastic increase of traffic, up to 57%. The same happened in France and in Spain with free access. Worldwide, the traffic was up 11% on March 17. If you are not into masturbating, maybe this is the time to try it out. It could be an idea to experiment with your body, to be curious and practice and find out what gives you pleasure and maybe an orgasm. Did you know that a penis has 4,000 nerve endings and clitoris has 8,000? Maybe it is a good idea to spend these isolated days to discover them. I understand it can be difficult these days with crowded homes, but maybe you can lock yourself in the bathroom, spend a little longer in the shower, or go for a drive. Just be creative. And if you're all by yourself in isolation, you can also do it with someone online. Having said this, it is totally okay not to masturbate. Still, I want you to know it is great for your health and it boosts your immune system. So, my pleasurable and healthy advice for you today: enjoy masturbation while you stay in isolation. Thank you.
Thank you. The book Raushetens Tid and the Emotional Revolution explore the significance of emotions in working life, social life, and in life in general. In this talk, writer, entrepreneur, and emotional strength trainer Katrine Aspaas will explain how to build your emotional strength. Katrine?
Thank you. I'd like to share some thoughts with you. And as far as I know, I'm the only person with these thoughts. I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough. I'm too old. This is awful. The world is coming to an end. I know these thoughts aren't doing me any good. But what if they're just the fake news of my brain? What if we could be our own editors and craft really useful stories for ourselves? I used to be a financial journalist, on the move 24/7, being hard and tough and smart until I was not. I was worn out and desperate for solutions. Luckily, I found them. in the rich new field of emotion research. And for the past 10 years, I've been an emotional trainer for leaders, and I want to give you the most powerful way to foster emotional grit and joy and courage. First, some brain science. It turns out our brains are not designed for happiness. It's designed to keep us afraid and safe. At Harvard and Yale, scientists call this the brain's negativity bias. And it used to be a good thing. This old reptile brain kept our ancestors alive, safe from wild animals. But we are not eaten and consumed by animals. We are consumed by our own thoughts, our own fear. We know that anxiety and depression is on the rise globally, so today this negativity bias can tear us apart. Luckily, we have a more modern part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, with a talent for creativity, joy, and calmness. So I'd like to invite you right now to close your eyes and give yourself a good breath together with me. I wonder, can you feel a certain calm? If so, that's your prefrontal cortex in action. And if closing your eyes was hard, that's your reptile brain yelling, "Don't do it! You may be eaten. It looks stupid. People will laugh at you." And because our prefrontal cortex is often overridden by our reptile brain, it needs exercise, just like our physical muscles. And now I want to give you the simplest and most efficient way of practicing. Practice gratitude. And this is where my inner hardcore journalist is still cringing and rolling her eyes. It's so banal, but it works. At Yale University, scientists have found that gratitude opens the door to good relations, better sleep, lower frustration, and a more healthy sense of self. And if you pull in an orgasm every now and then, fine. So if you feel clouds of worry, see if you can change them into waves of gratitude. Thank you for the rich smell of coffee in the morning. Thanks for the fresh air in Oslo right now. And today, with fear creeping around every corner, is probably a good time to start, because we can fix this. Thank you.
Thank you, Katrine. Håkon Kornstad is an award-winning Norwegian jazz saxophonist, recognized by jazz critics around the world. In 2009, he discovered his singing voice, and he finished a master's degree at the Norwegian Opera Academy in 2014. He's now dividing his time between two almost contrasting musical genres, combining them in unexpected ways. Due to COVID-19, he has lost all of his upcoming gigs this spring. He's now streaming live concerts from his home studio in Oslo instead, and thinks this new type of concert venue has come to stay. Håkon?
Thank you. The morning the coronavirus started to shut down Scandinavia, I was in Denmark. I had just taken a freezing morning bath, ready to go to rehearsal with an orchestra. Then the phone rang. The concert the same night was cancelled. In fact, all the concerts this spring were cancelled. My name is Håkon Kornstad. I'm a jazz musician and opera singer, and the creativity has saved me before. In the car back home to Norway, I was starting to think, streaming live concerts will be my lifeline for the next months. The day after, a concert series popped up on Facebook. I emailed the organizer right away. And one day after, I was setting up my home studio for broadcast. 100,000 people showed up. They donated very generously, and actually enough to keep me floating for several weeks. I want to tell all musicians around the world who has lost their gigs, setting up a streamed concert is easier than you think. More and more artists discover it now as a new way of reconnecting with their lost audience. And the audience seems to enjoy themselves too, chatting away about the music like they always do, grabbing a cold beer from their fridge, and even creating watch parties with their Tinder dates. It feels like 2 weeks ago is already another era. Digitalization has taken a big leap forward with this crisis. And I think we're seeing the beginning of a more and more professional live streaming hosted by the artists themselves and also monetized by the artists. This will not mean the death of record labels or your traditional concert venue, but I think 2020 will certainly be the year when the artists and their audience found a direct connection. Just after my return from Denmark, I started feeling slightly ill. I actually got fever, and it turned out I tested positive on the COVID-19 virus. Luckily for me, I got a very mild variant. It means I can play and sing for you now, but it has to be solo because I'm still in isolation. So take good care of yourself, stay home, and wash those hands. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Håkon, for the beautiful music and the insights in musicians' take on the COVID-19. The next speaker is Rick Wheatley, and his career began as a logistics officer in the US Army. Then on to the healthcare IT outsourcing. The last 15 years, he's been working with organizational change. Rick has also was also one of the architects of what has become the leadership vanguard. How can business plan for the future when the now is falling apart? He's asking in his next talk. Please welcome Rick Wheatley from Seattle.
Thank you, Sigurd, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to follow a talent like Håkon Kornstad. My gosh, what a way to get in state. It's easy for organizations and their leaders to get lost in a crisis, lost in the news feed, the flood of information, the confusion. And what is the first thing that happens when people get lost? They stop planning. They cope with the now, and they forget about the rest. Right now, we're in the middle of a crisis, and that's what many leaders are doing. Suddenly, they've let go of the future. But that's dangerous. Just because you stop thinking about the future doesn't mean there won't be one. There will be a future, and it will affect you. You can get what you get, or you can shape it. So, question. How does one go about shaping the future in the midst of a crisis? Create a few scenarios of what the future could be. Let's say 3. They have to be probable. Sorry, they don't have to be probable, merely plausible. Test them with experts and stakeholders, craft them into stories. Ensure the plausibility of each can be backed up by facts. There's a catch though. Scenario planning is typically used with longer lead times than we're thinking about now, to imagine situations 5 or 10 or even more years out. Right now in our current crisis, we have a new challenge. We need to imagine futures that could be radically different in just 3, 9, or 18 months, because life could be quite different in the near term, and we'll need to adapt. So the task has gotten harder, more relevant to us now, and more urgent. Let's look at some examples. 3 futures and 2 characteristics of each that start relatively close to our old normal and get progressively further from it in order to challenge our thinking. Scenario 1, the struggle for yesterday. Stimulus efforts succeed in keeping key industries and businesses alive until after the shock is over. Massive accumulation of public and private debt to keep the economy working and deal with post-crisis trauma. Scenario 2, New Deal redux. There's a new public appetite for investment in public services, like access to healthcare and unemployment benefits. But there's also aggressive surveillance by governments as they enforce measures like movement, social distancing, and rationing. Scenario 3, lack of international cooperation and strain on public finances as governments struggle to define and deliver a credible strategy for refiring the economy. People become more and more self-reliant. Platform players with great economic power and logistical capabilities step into semi-governance roles. We move from a market system to a platform oligopoly. Okay, final step. Test your strategy and plan against these three scenarios. Do your plans work across all three? Great. What if they only work in scenario one, the struggle for yesterday? Back to the drawing board. Strategies and plans that are built to cope well across multiple futures are best. Ones that require hope or miracles, not so much. Now remember how I started, talking about great leaders. Great leaders think about the future systemic impacts of the decisions they make today. But so must parents, citizens, politicians, healthcare workers, farmers, and maybe even children. That responsibility is shared now. They're unsatisfied with only surviving. They take control. And that's what we need to do now. Take back control of our futures by making and implementing plans that are solid enough to work across a range of changes and challenges coming at us. We will thrive in the end, but only if all of our eyes are wide open, dealing with the crisis unfolding outside our doors and working hard to decide next steps that will work regardless of what happens. Let's get to work on exactly that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rick. The current and long-standing president of the Norwegian Red Cross, Sven Mollekleiv, is considered one of Norway's most experienced humanitarian voices. He will talk about possible consequences for the corona pandemic, how increased inequality will make us all suffer, and why we must turn these risks to opportunities and invest in solidarity and youth. Are you there, Sven?
Dear friends, we are living in a time where we are challenged as individuals and as society. The core of a democratic society is the opportunity each of us has to take part in decisions that affect the community we live in. Over the last few weeks and months, we have realized that our personal actions, or lack thereof, affect the community directly. Every citizen has been asked to take responsibility to limit the spread of the coronavirus. We have been asked to contribute to our society by giving up what we a short while ago considered as basic human rights in our democracy: the freedom of movement. Democracy and human rights have one thing in common. They are based on the belief on equal and equality between people. Both recognize that all people are unique and different, but have the same value as human beings. Democracy is based on trust between us as human beings. Trust that we have the same right to be seen and challenged, the same right to be heard and disagree, the same right to participate and be involved, and the right to get support when we are vulnerable, but also to take responsibility when for ourselves and the society. This trust is now challenged. If we fail as individuals, we risk failing as a society. Democracy is difficult, and particularly in crisis, but democracy is even more important when the situation is dire. It is the key to healthy people, to planet and business. We see today how society struggles when business fails, and business will not succeed in a society that fails. We have a lot to lose. The world has been through incredible improvements since the UN Millennium Goals and the 17 Sustainable Development Goals were established. Today, we risk reversing these amazing achievements. Armed conflict and the consequences of climate change are constant and increased threats. With the outbreak of the corona pandemic and its possible global economic collapse, the world is more unstable and uncertain than we have seen for a very long time. And if the consequences is increased inequality, we will all suffer. Business, authority, and the society at large. Both our local communities and the global community are now dependent on our individual and collective will to invest in and commit to democracy and solidarity. We must build a common understanding of the challenges we are facing and the solutions needed to overcome them. We must provide the most important resources we have today, the youth, to be the best and give them the best platform to become the leaders of tomorrow. Now is the time to develop a World Youth Forum for Democracy, available to all 24/7, open for discussions and solutions based on science and facts. And that is one way to live up to the solemn promise we gave to our youth after the terrorist attack, the 22nd of July, 2011. We promised a society with more democracy, more humanity, and more transparency. Now we must live up to these promises together. Thank you.
Thank you, Sven. Next speaker worked on researching in algorithm optimization in Oxford, development of the search engine Alta Vista in Silicon Valley, product strategy in fast search and transfer in Oslo and Boston, operational management in Microsoft. Silvia Ceres is a mathematician and a technology investor who will explain why forced digitalization is good for you, especially if you live in Norway. Welcome, Silvia.
Thank you. So I'm here to tell you why forced digitalization is not all that bad for you. It might actually be a very healthy thing for the society that we live in, and especially if a society is as safe a democracy as Norway. So this crisis is so huge and so costly that it's almost difficult to talk about something that is positive in it, but I think that's what we need to do. There is a saying that when it storms, some people build windmills and some people seek cover. And the cost of not building the windmills that we need now is too costly. So we cannot not use the technology to save those thousands of lives and to save those billions of kroner or other currencies. Necessity is the mother of all invention, and now the necessity is huge and very, very urgent. And the sort of windmills that we have to be building today are in very large extent built on digital technology. Digital technology can help us build the necessary collaboration tools when we are all separated from each other and we either go to school at home or we work from home. It can also be used for new kinds of digital medicine, or it can be used for digital social management. In terms of collaboration tools, I want to mention a very interesting experience or learning I had from observing my 4 children. They are all in school age, and overnight they went from going to school to using their bedrooms as their classrooms. And what was really surprising to me is how quickly and how smoothly this transition went. So the kids adjusted to the new rhythm within a few days. The teachers adjusted to the new way of teaching and even found some really new cool ways of communicating and spreading their knowledge with their students. And the parents who have been very much in opposition to digitalization of schools in our municipality because of all kinds of worries they had about privacy and safety of their kids, are suddenly conspicuously silent. We were forced to move maybe in 2 weeks what normally would have taken us 10 years in terms of adoption of digital technology in schools. And it has forced us to see the good, and it has forced us to think very quickly about the bad as well. So there is always a catch with technology. It has a good side, it has a bad side. The determinism discussion about technology says that technology comes when it's needed, and every technology has a good side and every technology has a bad side. Think about fire. It can be used to cook and it can be used to war. And the same thing with digital technology. It can be used to make incredibly good, let's say, digital medicine tools, which can use geolocation and different kinds of biodiagnostics to decide whether you have fever or how the contagion might be spreading. But it also has the privacy problem. Sorry. Harari has been writing in Financial Times a couple of days ago about how this way of digitalizing our societies at breakneck speed might be ending the world as we know it, in terms of us forever losing our privacy. There is a wonderful book called Surveillance Capitalism by Shoshana Zuboff that explores exactly this argument, and it's hugely influenced by all kinds of worries about privacy and our ability to self-determine our future in the future. And it's very interesting because some people say that this necessity for digital technology now has killed this tech backlash, where we worried about it and hated it for fake news and all other kinds of social problems. And there are other people who say that we should delay because we still don't know what the long-term consequences are. And I believe that basically we need to roll things out because the times demand them, but we have to think about the long-term consequences very urgently as well. And I've been thinking a lot about a book called The New AI Superpowers by a guy called Kai-Fu Lee, where he talks about how there are 2 nations worldwide that are able to harness the full power of AI and data technology in the times to come. And it's United States and China. And I would like to make a case that in a country like Norway, we can harness this technology in a way that is the third way, which doesn't go to the extremes of the Chinese totalitarian collectivism and the extremes of the US individual market competition, but basically builds on a society that is probably one of the most democratic societies in the world, one of the richest per capita societies in the world, but also one of the societies with the best infrastructure and the best level of technical skills. And I believe that here we shouldn't worry so much as in many other places about who gets to own our data, because in terms of health and welfare and safety and social inclusion, it is the state that owns the data, but also provides all of these services. I believe that we need to ask these questions from our politicians, but at the same time, I think we need to create and use these tools now. Darwin has a wonderful phrase that is oft quoted that says, it's not the strongest, but the fastest that always win the evolutionary race. But his next sentence is that it's where the environmental pressure is the greatest that the evolution progress is the fastest. We really have huge environmental pressure now in this corona crisis, but this is an opportunity for really fast and immense change. I believe we need to look at this as an opportunity to create many new things. We need to think long term. We need to think about equality and inclusion, but as much as we need to remember to be safe, we also need to remember to be brave.
Thank you very much, Silvia. Nassima Zair has both interdisciplinary and intercultural expertise. She is the founder of Interbridge, which prepares Generation Z for the future through leadership academies. Nassima.
Anger, rebellion, change. questioning authorities. You know that feeling when you as a teenager turn around to those in charge to blame them for the mistakes they made, and you just know that there is another way to do things. Remember how growing up, the blame was on the generations that had come before you? And remember how it felt to actually believe that the world could be a better place. Well, this has been the reality for many generations of teenagers. However, the generation growing up now is different. Research shows that Generation Z lacks hope for the future. They're stressed out from the pressure experienced from social media, for example, and they are very concerned about climate change and general global unrest. For the last 10 years, I've been working with empowering youth globally, which led me to found the startup Interbridge. We offer teenagers from all backgrounds leadership academies, and we bring their youth insights to decision makers. This allows me to take the pulse on what this generation thinks, feels, and wishes for the future. And with the Corona crisis going on, we had to create space to discuss it and share thoughts. And we asked them, how does the world look like after Corona? And amongst many reflections about the gravity of this crisis, the fear of losing loved ones, homeschooling, uncertainty around the duration and the consequences, I see one very interesting tendency in their answers that presents a sort of silver lining in these challenging times. And that is the aspect about the positive effects on the climate. With the biggest drop in carbon emissions in 30 years, clearer waters, and an ecological renewal. Like one of them said, humans are giving Earth a break, and it's too bad that it had to take a global pandemic to understand that the damages we're causing our planet are reversible, and that we have not been able to do that by ourselves until now. Could it be that this crisis is somehow awakening hope for the future in a generation that had lost it? Now, that all depends. It will depend on all of us, the lessons learned, and what choices we make when we build up society post-Corona. This pandemic is teaching us that we are vulnerable beings in a vulnerable environment, and that we have a vulnerable economy when we are affected. Moving forward, we will need to think and choose differently, especially while developing solutions for society. We will need to bring up the framework of the triple bottom line consisting of people, planet, and profit. And we see that all three are equally important. But until now, planet and people have been sacrificed for profit. So we need to shift how we prioritize them. And we need to put people in the center of everything we do, with investing in human capital being the most important shift to uphold balance. We will need the insight of the youth, and we definitely all need hope.
Thank you very much, Nasima. Christer is working as a Harkness Fellow in Healthcare Policy and Practice at Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health in Boston, United States. His research spans a range of medical topics like public health, healthcare reform, and value-based healthcare. As a physician and public health researcher, Mjoset's talk is about some of the lessons learned from the COVID-19 pandemic so far, and the importance to include work on social determinants of health when preparing for the next outbreak. Please welcome Christer Mjoset.
It's hard not to think about how we as a global community have failed to meet the challenges that has come with the COVID-19 pandemic. And as a Norwegian physician and public health researcher, self-isolating here in Boston, I would like to use this opportunity to share some of my perspective from a US standpoint. Our failure lies in our preparation. It's the lack in testing of people. It's the limited availability of protective gear for healthcare personnel is the predicted mismatch between hospital beds and patients. The failure lies also in the response time. For a while, this was a Chinese problem before it became an Italian problem. Then it was a European problem. So this pandemic is someone else's problem. We have failed to see this as a global challenge, and we have failed to meet it with global means. There's been a lack of compassion because we never thought that this virus was actually going to affect us. But our failure lies not only in the way we have planned things and how we have acted, or even when we have acted, it also lies in the way we have chosen to organize our societies and especially our healthcare. The social determinants of health are all the factors that influence our health status. It's the conditions in which we are born, grow, live, work. It's our access to healthcare. With this pandemic, it's suddenly become relevant to most of us that 24% of US workers do not have paid sick leave because we need them to stop working and stay at home to prevent the disease from spreading further. It's become essential when we go to the step to close schools that many school children get their only decent daily meal in the school cafeteria because their parents cannot afford to feed them properly. It's become essential when we want people to get tested or treated that they have health insurance. And it's become essential when you impose a lockdown of a whole city that people actually have homes. In this way, the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, has revealed holes in our infrastructures that to most of us, they didn't really matter to us until now. In the beginning of March, I was in Washington, D.C. with a group, and the morning on the 12th, that was the day after the World Health Organization declared the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, and it was the day also that President Donald Trump decided to close the airspace in Europe, the US. We spoke to some people in Congress, in the US Congress, and very, very clearly one woman saying to us, when all this is over, we need to start talking more about solidarity because we have to be more prepared the next time a virus hits us, and that's just a matter of time. There are some bright spots, obviously. Healthcare workers have been working round the clock to treat their patients. Patients that sometimes even have been their own colleagues, their own bosses. And in a way, this virus has erased the borders, the barriers between patients and physicians, because we are all in this together. But luckily, it doesn't affect our children seriously. We have managed to redesign care rapidly and in a major way. The patients in the ER and in primary care that are the most heterogeneous parts of healthcare have been organized into segments even before they have entered a hospital or office. There's been a boom in telemedicine, made it possible for us to treat patients in their own homes. And in a fragmented US healthcare system, new coalitions between competitors in the healthcare market have been formed that were unthinkable before to stop the spread of the virus. And last but not least, we have managed to change our behavior in a major way to protect our elders, the sick, and the vulnerable. And as I speak now, this self-isolation, all the lockdowns, they seem to have an effect on the spread of the virus. And if that is true, we have come a long way to beat the virus and to prepare ourselves for the next. So in the meantime, while we all wait to get back to our normal life, please remember to regularly wash your hands, practice social distancing, because it has an impact. So don't lose hope. Because when all this is over, we need to start talking more about solidarity, the social determinants of health, and how to come together as a global community. Thank you.
Thank you, Christer. I think we have the, yeah, I think you can hear me, I hope. Thank you, Christer. I think we have the video ready now. So if we have, you can just run it.
Hei, hei alle på TEDx Oslo. Jeg heter Peter Baden, og jeg skal holde en liten konsert for dere nå. Eller vil si, jeg skal ha et lite utdrag av en konsert vi nettopp har holdt. På denne konserten så inviterte jeg andre musikere til å spille sammen med min strøm. Så på en skjerm bak seg så holdt en musiker en konsert, hvor jeg var på skjermen bak, og han sto foran, og så streamet han det. Og så når han sendte det ut, så var det en annen musiker som holdt en ny konsert med den konserten på en skjerm bak seg, mens han spilte til. Og så strømmet han ut det. Og vi var 4 i kjeden som gjorde det samtidig, og nå sitter vi og prøver å mikse det sammen og lage en plate av det. Det er veldig morsomt hvordan den situasjonen her også knytter oss sammen på en helt ny måte. Musikere som ikke var vant til det før, må plutselig strømme og se inn i kamera og gjøre ting de egentlig ikke er så komfortable med ofte. Jeg er en av de, men jeg synes allikevel det er veldig morsomt å få lov å være med dere i dag. Nå kommer et lite utdrag av den konserten, og jeg håper dere har det bra på TEDx Oslo så lenge.
Thank you very much, Peter. I think many of us are stretching our technical capacity to the max these days, but Peter has really pushed it further than most of us. The last speaker of the day is Kalle Måne. He is a professor of economics at the University of Oslo He has worked a lot on inequality and development in rich and poor societies. Today, he will talk briefly about why a fair sharing of the burden in the corona crisis is important for implementing good policies and rapid recovery. Welcome, Kalle Mohamed.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to talk about the crisis, the economic crisis of Corona. It is not an ordinary economic crisis. It's different from most others. In ordinary crisis situations, then we want to solve the problem and get back to normal as fast as we can. This is not the case in this crisis. We have sort of turned the economy down willingly in several countries at the same time, more or less. And that means that we sort of reduce the activity on many fronts. And as long as the health problem continues, this is going to be the situation for a while. So that means that solving the crisis as we normally do in economics, or try to give advice how she can be solved, that's not the case this time. It's not an option at all that we can rely on. So the crisis is both international and national, and of course also in the local community. Let me keep it to the national level. Even though we live in countries that are not most severely hit, that would be developing countries, I'm afraid, hasn't yet really developed there, but we live in a country that is severely hit by the crisis. And it is a crisis in the sense that they have many problems at the same time. Demand has gone down. Many activities can't sell what they normally produce because there's no demand for it. There's also activities that sort of been reduced because they don't have the normal resources that they use in production. They don't have the available workforce, and because they are home. And there can be other things that hit them on the resource side, which is very different from the demand, that we are both on the supply and demand side, creating a crisis. In addition, there's a profitability crisis, that many things that used to be profitable before is not profitable to produce anymore, and you have to maybe to stop for that reason or produce with a loss. And finally, it is a huge liquidity crisis. The reason why I'm saying all this, that we have all these problems at the same time. And that means when once the health problems are over, it is not the case that back and forth is the same distance. When we go back again, we're going to hit bottlenecks of different types, maybe, and that makes the resource constraints in other activities and profitability constraints in other enterprises, and liquidity may still be a problem for others. We have to move back again. We have to solve all the problems simultaneously, while no, we are really going down by just having one bottleneck that is the most severe. So this is why I think it's going to take a long time to recover unless we are as smart as we can be. And to be smart in this case means to have more sharing of the consequences of the crisis, sharing in income, sharing in the burden, I would say, of the crisis. Just give one example. Somebody hit by a very negative shock, they lost their income, they are forced to reduce their spending because they have basically lack of income that they used to have, and for reasons they have no control over themselves. They're just locked out from their own activities and their own income source. And then you have others who may keep their own income at the same level as before. They have a stable job, but they can't use their income in the same manner. They have so-called forced saving. They have to reduce their consumption of different things. They can do fewer activities simply because they are closed down. They are a part of the crisis and therefore not available anymore. Of course, here is already a huge example of, or important example of, how we can share the burden, because the burden between these two groups that are rather considerable in most societies, The difference between these two groups is just that one lacked money, the other one had saved more than they had planned to, because they have consumed less than they actually planned to consume. And it's not the only, it's just one example, and we see that the burden sharing will sort of even out the consequences. We have burden sharing between enterprises, of course. There's some enterprises, some sectors of the economy that hit much more severely than others. And of course, they have to share in some sense in the burden by getting some resources challenged to them, either by liquidity or by subsidizing the activity, in order to maintain the production facilities when the health problems are over. So why is burden sharing so important? Well, there are many reasons. First of all, it is fair, because these problems that are created and so unevenly distributed over people and over activities and sectors, they are not created by those who bear the burden of it. And of course, then fairness should dictate us to have a much more even sharing in the consequences of the crisis. So that's the first thing. It is fair, and therefore a good thing in itself. But fairness also motivates better behavior, better policies, because now we know that everybody going to share in the consequences of the crisis, even though we are hit very asymmetrically. We have to share in it via the policies that there are many ways of doing it. And then we have more information immediately about the severity of the crisis, because we know that this implies, for example, that those of us who have kept the job and kept the intake, we have to maybe imposed with an extra tax of 10% later on. That means that we understand much more of the severity that has hit the total society. And that means that we also are willing to sort of support different policy in a different way when we have more information about the total consequences of it. That's also another thing that with sharing, that means that because we have to do this now, motivate policies that share the burden of the crisis. And then we do it when we have sort of a warm glow. We have we are hit by, we have a warm heart because we can see the consequences of the crisis. When the health problems are over, some of us we have been luckily hit. We have still our income. Others have really damaged their own activity and severely hit by the crisis. Then it's much more of a conflict between what you can say winners and losers of the crisis. And then it's too late to start sharing. We have to do it now in the sense that we have to motivate the politicians, those in charge of the crisis policy, to implement the fair distributional consequences that are necessary for the economy to come back again. And when you also share more of the consequences, it is not so dramatic, these bottlenecks that are started, that when we move up, then you are hit by one bottleneck and then you are dragged by another one. If you share more of the consequences, then it's easier to move back to the old activity levels, or maybe to a new activity levels if you want to sort of take a new route in a more green way or whatever. But sharing would be the recipe in both cases. And it's also that we know the cost of the crisis, and we can also have some influence how long we want it to last, because it is politically determined how much we sort of put our foot on the brake on the economy, how much we close down of economic activities. After a while, we have more control over the virus. We have to slacken up maybe, and how fast we're going to do that. That's going to be a big discussion in all societies. If we share in the burden, we have more accurate information about the right thing to support, because there are going to be political challenges here and discussions about these things. Let me finally say that there are many things we have learned in this crisis or been reminded of. One thing that we've been reminded of is that there's a huge, very important group in society that are basically freelancers. They are very important because they are very often involved in cultural activities that we appreciate so much. what this crisis has taught us, that they are very poorly insured. They are very severely hit by the crisis, more than much more than the average citizen. And I think one important thing is to think about arrangement where sort of freelancers, artists, writers, musicians of different types, and also people who are involved in sort of temporary jobs and so on. That is so important in most cities and most communities, that they need to be better insured in order for not these activities to stop so abruptly that they have done now, and with so bad consequences for those who are involved. So I think that should be one group that you think much more about. They are a much bigger group than many people think, and that is an important lesson from the crisis. Okay, thank you for me.
Thank you very much, Kalle. That concludes the first ever digital TEDx Oslo conference. I guess it's allowed to say I hope you enjoyed our broadcast. And if you have any comments or suggestions, you can send us an email on info@TEDxOslo.no. This has been an incredible experience from day one. Everyone involved, the team, the speakers, TED partners and contributors have been amazing. A special thanks to the team, which is Hilvi Pettersson, Petter Nilsen and Hansine Killingmo Såstad. You have been outstanding and a total joy to work with. And in the end, also thank you to our partners for making this conference happen on such a short notice. Fritt Ord, Holy and Zoom. Thank you for watching and have a good and safe weekend.